Hey everybody, we have a couple of pitches for you. First up is Bill Brady with Kula Bio, and then we've got Brian Spears with New Age Meats. I'll let Bill take it from here.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Brady. I'm CEO of Kula Bio. And Kula Bio is an organic, sustainable nitrogen fertilizer company. We're organic, sustainable at a cost and performance which is competitive with synthetic fertilizer. I think we're maybe the one company here during the conference that's taking a look at things one step back in the supply chain or the value chain. And we are addressing how our plants and how our food gets their nitrogen. I think, as you all probably know, we all need nitrogen to live and grow because it's a major component of amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. The problem we have is that the way the world gets its nitrogen today is completely unsustainable. And on top of that, we're going to need a lot more nitrogen because as the population grows from 7 billion to 10 billion, we're simply going to need more nitrogen. So we're addressing this problem of how do you feed the population while doing it in a sustainable way. So here's the current problem. So synthetic nitrogen fertilizer grows the food that feeds most of the world today. And it has two big drawbacks. Number one, for every ton of nitrogen fertilizer produced synthetically, you produce and emit about 4 tons of CO2. And on the other hand, once you do apply this nitrogen fertilizer, you lose about 50% of it, either as toxic runoff, that is, when it rains, it runs off and ends up in our waterways, causes dead zones in our waterways, in our marine life, or it volatilizes and gives off even more potent greenhouse gases. And so when you add all that together, chemical nitrogen fertilizer or synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is responsible for about 5% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. So here's our solution. Here's what we do. Our solution is a microbial solution. And what we do to these microbes is shown in this picture. If you look at that tank, that's meant to be our proprietary bioreactors. And into the bioreactor goes microbes, that's those little green figures, water, and a salt nutrition mix. And these microbes grow themselves up rapidly with that salt nutrition mix. When we get them to a certain point, we cut off the nutrition. And at that point, we split the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and we pump in air, which includes CO2. The microbe, which is now under stress, aggressively consumes hydrogen and CO2 and metabolizes and stores within its cell structure an energy storing material. It's called a bioplastic, but it's an energy storing material. We inject a little bit of energy into the mix, and the microbe is now has its own independent source of energy. So this is important because what we do next is spray that microbe onto the soil. If the microbe didn't have its own source of energy, it would have to compete with the existing microbes for energy. And in that case, it would only live for hours, maybe a day. With our source of energy that we've put into these microbes, once they get into the ground, they live for 2.5 weeks. And what they do during those 2.5 weeks, which is shown on the lower left side of this slide, is they fix nitrogen from the air. Our air is 80% nitrogen. And so what these microbes have a capability to do is to draw on that stored energy that we've given them and fix nitrogen biologically grab it from the air and deposit it in the soil. And as I mentioned, with our energy source, they can do this for about 2.5 weeks. They do it for 2.5 weeks. All of a sudden, the quantity of nitrogen that they're able to deposit becomes meaningful. And if you divide the costs of what it takes us to make these by that quantity of nitrogen, the cost gets very competitive with synthetic. So that's how the mechanism works. The microbe grabs the nitrogen from the air, deposits it in the soil, and then it is taken up by the plants. So these pictures you see on the left is a small jug of our product, and on the right is a couple of bins of our product. That picture on the right is at a farm in Salinas Valley, California. And the product, as you can see in those pictures, is an orange liquid. It's kind of like orange juice, the consistency of orange juice. And we've done a number of commercial farm trials, and in every one of those trials, our microbes have replaced between 50 and 100% of synthetic fertilizer. The other important thing, because our product is a liquid, and kind of a simplified liquid, it's not two-component or anything like that, the farmer can simply use it in whatever his existing liquid delivery system is today. So if he has a drip delivery system, a pivot sprayer, a flood system, he can use it. So it requires no new capital from the farmer and really no change in the way he does things. And then this is just an overview of the most recent trial we did on tomatoes. And in this trial, our microbes resulted in a 75% reduction in synthetic fertilizer, but also a 50% increase in yield. And so what you see in these pictures, all the way on the left side, UAN, that's the acronym for synthetic fertilizer, and KM is the Kula microbe. So all the way on the left side is the yield from a given sample tomato plant in this trial with no fertilizer. The picture in the middle is the yield from 100% synthetic fertilizer. And then the picture on the right is the yield from a blend of 75% Kula microbe, 25% synthetic. And as you can see in the picture, you can see graphically, but also as I mentioned, it was overall in the study, it was a 50% increase in yield. The other interesting thing we noticed on these fruits was that the Kula blend, all the way on the right, on average, had a 25% larger fruit than synthetic. So that is Kula Bio in a nutshell. Our 2020 plan is to continue to scale up our bioreactors to larger and larger volume, and also to increase our farm trials. So we've got a number of trials in California and in Yuma, Arizona, on a bunch of different crops in 2020. So we're very excited about the impact we can have for the farmers, given these results, the impact we can have on the environment, given the terrible footprint of synthetic, and we think over time we're going to be able to provide a good return for our investors. So I will wrap it up there and be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. I will field the first question. So the first one is, can't you plant a cover crop of legumes that are nitrogen fixing out of the air and till them into the soil? How does the cost of what you're doing compare to planting legumes that fix them in the soil?
you definitely can improve the nitrogen content with the cover crops, as mentioned. The question is the quantity of nitrogen, and cover cropping is a really important part of regenerative organic farming. But you won't wipe out 50 to 100% of synthetic nitrogen with cover crops alone. So it's quite possible over time that a combination of cover cropping and Kula Bio and Kula Bio microbes could wipe out 100% of synthetic. And I'm sorry, I don't have the cost. I don't have the cost comparison with cover crops. With synthetic nitrogen, we're more or less we're more or less at an equal cost. If you look at the cost per pound of nitrogen, we're more or less at parity with synthetic nitrogen.
Okay, great. And do you expect fertilizer to be OMRI certified for organic use?
Yes, we definitely do. We've started down the pathway. We've had reviewers into our facility, and our product itself, the product itself is completely organic. They advised us to wait until we got our manufacturing process scaled up and lined out before we went for the formal certification, because for us the question will be more about our manufacturing than the product itself, because the product is completely organic. I will tell you, just as an aside, it was interesting when we had the reviewers in. One of the big questions was, are you a fertilizer? Because think about it, as presented, as applied to the soil, our microbes actually don't contain any nitrogen. It's once they get in the soil and they start to grab it from the air and deposit it in the soil. So, it's quite an interesting revelation, and so we'll see how that goes. But I'm quite confident we'll have OMRI certification towards the end of this year.
Okay. Awesome. Let me see if there are. Okay, one more question. What is the conditions and shelf life of Kula? What is the field environment that is needed to activate Kula?
Yeah. So there is really nothing special that needs to be done in the field to activate Kula. You open the bins that contain our microbes, put it in the water distribution system, and the microbe gets in the soil and goes to work. So it's not a two-component system. It doesn't have to be activated. I know I've heard quite a lot from the farmers about some of the other products that are out there that must be activated, and it's hard. It's difficult for them to add another layer of activity. So just out of the package and onto the soil, doesn't need to be activated. Shelf life we're working on. Right now we have had 2 to 3 weeks at room temperature of shelf life with no adverse effects, and we have had more or less indefinite storage at mild refrigeration with no adverse effects. Of course, we don't want to need mild refrigeration, so we have a body of work going on now studying the shelf life and studying different means. These are very well-known means of extending the shelf life of microbial products.
Awesome. Your consumers are farmers within this group. Are there sections that you think will benefit the most from your product? For example, is there a region in particular or a producer of a certain type of crop?
Well, one of the interesting things about, the two interesting things about our approach, one is the quantity of nitrogen that these microbes can deliver. So as I mentioned, 50 to 100% of the nitrogen replacement. And by the way, the more of the energy storing material we can fatten up these microbes with in our bioreactor, which will increase over time, the more we fatten them up, the longer they're going to live and the more nitrogen they're going to deliver. So that's one big difference, is is how much nitrogen can be applied. The second really interesting thing is most other microbial approaches are very specific to a soil or very specific to a particular crop or a crop in a particular region. So like corn in Nebraska, corn in Minnesota might be different. For us, because our microbe deposits the nitrogen directly in the soil, not to the plant, we're crop agnostic. So we've worked on every crop we've tested so far. We've tested tomatoes, berries, lettuce, corn. It's worked on all of them. I would say we have had the best results on tomatoes and berries. And you saw the slide that I showed on tomatoes. We haven't seen that 50% yield impact across all crops, but we have on tomatoes and berries. So I think it's going to be applicable to all crops. That it's probably going to work a little different on them. Our go-to-market plan, by the way, is to focus on organic produce first, and then get to the row crops after that.
Awesome. Okay. I think that Brian has dropped off. Unfortunately, we're trying to get him back. So if you have time, we'll keep pinging you with a couple more questions.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay. The next one, are there environmental factors such as a wet spring, which affects Kula's ability to consistently fix nitrogen?
Well, we haven't seen it yet, although I will tell you we're doing currently doing trials in Salinas Valley, California, and in Yuma, Arizona on lettuce, and it's been really wet, unusually wet, and so we're going to know. But everything so far, we've done head-to-head with synthetic. And we've gotten the results that I've reported in a bunch of different, environmental and weather conditions.
Okay, awesome. That sounds great. Thanks so much. Brian, let's pivot over to you.
Great. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me jump into my presentation here. All right. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. And if you've seen me speak before, then you generally know that I like to talk about Jessie. I usually talk about how we got some cells from Jessie back in 2018. And I usually talk about how we took her cells back to our lab and separated out the stem cells and grew and multiplied the stem cells and then differentiated them into muscle and fat, and then made them into these pork sausages. These are not stock photos. These are our sausages. And I usually talk about how we fed them to people, and they loved them. They ate them in a downtown San Francisco brewery. And I'll say something about how Business Insider was there, and they tried them, and they said it was smoky and savory and tasted like breakfast. How they went on and said it tasted like meat because it was meat, and how they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this pork sausage and any other. And normally, I would say that we have two big challenges beyond just making great tasting sausages, is to drop the cost of the protocols and then to scale up the production. And I'll also talk about, generally again, some of the successes we've had, like removing animal serum, immortalizing our cell lines, designing our own bioreactors, implementing a high throughput media optimization system, and having two experienced former Impossible Foods employees developing our food and designing our pilot facility. Normally, I talk about all those things. But today, also, I want to talk about sometimes fundraising. We did raise a price seed round last year, and we're raising a few million more right now. We're 75% committed, so maybe come talk to me. But I'd like to talk about today how our meat production system is broken. And COVID-19 is making that very clear. And this leads to problems across three terms: the short term, the midterm, and long term. And the short term, we can see what's happening. Workers are standing shoulder to shoulder all day cutting apart carcasses. They're exposed to COVID-19 from each other. These are the measures that the meat processing industry has put in place to protect these workers. They're also exposed to future zoonotic diseases from the animals themselves, which I'll talk about in a second. For example, in Cass County, Indiana, home of a large Tyson Foods facility, the number of coronavirus cases has spiked in recent weeks from meeting these types of conditions. The current administration has ordered these workers back to work, even though 6,500 have been sickened and 30 have died. The administration has offered protection, liability protection, for the companies against the potential lawsuits coming from workers forced to return to work. And again, this is all in the short term. In the midterm, it's important to know that this will not be the last pandemic. There will be many more, and this one, COVID-19, isn't even that bad. The WHO said 2 months ago that the mortality rate of COVID-19 is about 3.4%, and that's compared to, as you see, avian flu, 60% mortality, SARS, 15%, MERS, 35%. All of these are zoonotic diseases. They come from animals, and then they jump species and come to us. The issue is, if I were a supervillain trying to create a super bug in order to wipe out the human species, I couldn't do better than the existing industrial animal agricultural system. I take all the same species of animals, I put them together in cramped, unsanitary conditions, I have them eat unnatural diets, they're very stressed, and then at the end of that, I put workers in extremely close contact with those animals inside of their cavities, exposed to all their bodily fluids, which leads to transmissions of not just the virus.
Hey, Brian, just to jump in here, I don't think anyone's able to hear you at the moment. Do you mind trying to maybe unplug and plug back in headphones or anything like that? Ah, okay, he is reconnecting. Okay, we will try and get him back right away.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, sorry about that. We lost you there for a quick sec.
No problem, no problem. Just talking to myself there. Where did you lose me?
We have about 5 minutes left, so why don't you just jump in?
Okay.
We're midway and we'll cruise to the end. If you want to reshare your screen, that'd be great too. Thanks.
Do that, sure. Okay, I was talking about all that. I gave essentially the problems of the existing industrial animal agriculture system. And all of this, I say all this because we're witnessing the very beginning of the transition to make meat a better way. And I'm not saying any of that in order to shame meat or to deny that we want it. The solution is really just to make it a better way. And to do that, we need to understand what human needs our meat provides. It provides two needs, essentially, evolutionary and cultural. An evolutionary need, we've evolved to want this meat. We want the savory, umami aspect, the fact that it's satiating and calorie dense. It's a mix of protein and fat. It's red, has this bouncy bite. And also cultural. It sits in the center of our plate, complemented by typically carbs, if you're not a keto person. It's in our traditional recipes. We eat it with our families. We cook it together. So in order to make a meat that replaces the existing system, we need to understand these needs, these deep human needs. And in New Age Meats, we make that. We make that meat that's tastier, safer, and more sustainable. And in fact, the current design of our pilot facility uses one person in a safe, clean, automated production facility. So we are fundraising now. Feel free to come and contact me. Sorry you missed a portion of the presentation. I'm not sure it was missed, so feel free to ask questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I think we've got time for a question or two. So I will pose one to you to kick us off. At what point do you believe cultivated meat will be competitive on a price basis or a taste basis or any other basis with conventional and plant-based meat?
Well, I'll start on the taste basis. The taste basis is actually, we've already done. The first time I ate it, I put it in my mouth and I said, that's bacon. I ate pork, fat, and muscle cooked up, and it didn't taste like bacon, it was bacon. So the taste is already there. As far as the cost competitiveness, we kind of follow a relatively unique route from what I understand, which is we use our cultivated meat as a functional ingredient to a blended product where we take other healthy ingredients from plant and fungal ingredient sources, and we put that together to make a pork sausage here for a Western market and pork dumpling for an Asian market. And because of that, we're able to make this cost competitive, and we'll be in the market in a few years.
Awesome. Okay, I think we've got time for one more quick question. With general aversion to GMOs, are cultivated meat producers worried about potential pushback from cultivated meats being quote unquote unnatural? And how do they plan to address this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's worth noting that some geographies on Earth are very against genetic modification. So the EU, for instance, has some more strict regulations there. In the US, you can already get an aqua bounty. I mean, aqua bounty salmon, for instance, is a genetically modified meat that has been approved. If you go to Asia, there are several countries that are very interested in that. I should note that it's not necessary to genetically modify the meat in order to make it. Simply taking cells and growing them outside of an animal's body is not genetic modification. So if the question is naturalness, then again, I would go back to our existing industrial animal agriculture system and ask, is that natural to have these billions of animals in, for instance, a shed where they don't have access to light or water, can't move around, are fed an unnatural diet, and we have hormones and antibiotics being fed to them. We actually don't want a natural food source. What we want is a tastier, healthier, safer food source, and that's what we provide.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much. That's all we have time for. Next up, folks, we have two more pitches from Misfit Markets and Pasture Organics. Thanks everyone for your questions and joining us, and have a great rest of your day.